It's great to see everybody. You know, this has been an unbelievable year. I'm going back to my old, I say this every year, the SID roots and the numbers and statistics and such, but I think a couple milestones of interest and there's a lot to talk about. I know that there's a number of questions. I've kind of done Radio Row and answered some of them, but numerous issues floating around out there in college athletics today, and most recently a tweet of maybe a half hour ago that's caused some interest in the collegiate world. But way back on March 1st through the 7th in 2020, we were one of the very first and only conferences to play its men's and women's basketball championship. We played a week early, if you recall, because of the construction convention and the hotel rates, so we played a week early. It was fortuitous. It was lucky as hell. We got the tournament in before we were supposed to have played it, and then probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the leagues did not even play their basketball championship. Jump ahead a few days later, I was in New York with the men's basketball selection committee, and at 12:29 approximately, exactly, rather, 12:29 p.m., the NCAA canceled the 2020 basketball championship. August 10th, all summer we had numerous calls and conversations talking about what we were going to do, where we were going to play, we were going to be able to play, and with our board and athletic directors and health and safety advisory committee. And on August 10th, the board of directors declared that we were postponing all scheduled fall sports. A little over a month later, on September 24th, due to changes in rapid testing as well as costs, we were able to announce that we were going to play and resume a truncated fall schedule where we played basically conference games only in all sports, including football. And we began play on October 24th. So what happened between October 24th and June 2021? Just a sampling, we had nearly 90% of our scheduled games in all sports were played, with the exception of football. We missed 10 scheduled conference games. We had 105 athletic directors calls, Zoom calls, 91 commissioner calls, 63 health and safety calls, 38 board of directors. Now keep in mind, I usually talk to the board 3 times a year. I talked to them 38 times, each call lasting a little over an hour. They're probably tired of listening to me, but we had so much business to conduct and prepare for not only this season, but finishing the athletic and academic year last year. This doesn't include coaches, CFP, men's basketball committee, or NCAA other calls. So all total, probably in the vicinity of 500 hour to 2 hour Zoom calls by my staff, myself, and others. We conducted championships in 10 sports, ended up playing, as I said, between 80 and 100% of those scheduled games. March and April of this year were quite hectic. We had 29 days, personally, 29 days at the JW Marriott in Indianapolis, helping to conduct the NCAA basketball championship. I did get to see Utah State play down in Bloomington. We, by the way, proposed a 12-team CFP expansion model, and I'm sure there's some questions. We can discuss that a little bit. All this culminated despite a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic like none of us have ever experienced, in a record distribution of over $49 million. This is in part due to an increased television media contract. We were probably about $10 to $12 million short of projection because the NCAA distributed 37.5% of its 100% basketball championship revenue, and CFP revenue is down as well. We're in the midst of collecting a few dollars, a few $100,000 as much perhaps as even $1 million from insurance cancellation. We're still discussing that for both the football and men's and women's basketball championship. So all said, despite an unbelievable year, we were able to conduct a championship. I've been asked many times by folks today, what was the most rewarding thing about the 2021 season? I think it's very simple. We played. And we gave the opportunity to the student athletes to do what they wanted to do the most, get on the court, get on the field. We didn't play a full season. Through the NCAA, we're able to allow them an extra year of eligibility, whether they played 1 game or 10 games or 20 games last year. And so we're back on track. The biggest fear I have right now, and been answered many times this morning, is probably complacency with the virus. Again, looking around the room with the masks, appreciate everybody helping us out and adhering to that rule. But I think there's so many in this world, this country, that are saying the worst is over, it's done. Doubtful. If you look at today's news, I don't know what the number is this afternoon. This morning it was 79 Olympians that have been disqualified from competition in Tokyo because of positive testing or tracing. What we're going to do with the Mountain West Conference, we're about this close to finalizing. The board is going to look at it one more time and one more review by Health and Safety. Health and Safety is highly recommending that all individuals receive a COVID vaccination at their earliest opportunity. Individuals are either going to be considered in one of 2 categories: vaccinated, unvaccinated. Vaccinated, unvaccinated. Vaccinated, play on. Social distancing, masking, etc. will not be required. Testing will not be required. Unvaccinated, testing will be required. And we're looking at the probability of 3 antigen and or 1 PCR test. It'll be at the expense of the university, at their discretion. And again, a weekly testing cadence for unvaccinated student athletes. To give you an example, right now, football teams, we did a survey last week at the behest of the athletic directors, are about 73% vaccinated. We have 7 institutions that are right at that 90% vaccination. So we've got a great start on it, and we're getting close, but knowing, the season starts in about 5 weeks. The Health and Safety Advisory Committee continues to monitor through the CDC, the NCAA, member institutions, and certainly local authorities what's happening in their communities. We have 2 states, as it stands today, California and Colorado, that will require mandatory testing for all students. All students. Now, Colorado is dependent on FDA approval of the vaccine. California state system, that's their plan today, but that could change in the future. So we're evaluating and monitoring daily the vaccination, the inoculations, and we'll continue to look at this and develop a finite plan well before the season. But right now the working plan is unvaccinated, you will be tested, you will be contact traced. In addition to this, the Mountain West does not plan to cancel, postpone, or reschedule any games. If the game is scheduled to begin at 1 o'clock on Saturday and Team X is not available to play, it will be determined a forfeit. That's different than last year. Last year, there was no vaccine. Last year, there was not a choice to be made. This year, there is. And we are not going to mandate, as a league, vaccination, but we will have consequences if you are not able to participate as a team. We're looking at no minimum roster thresholds. If you recall, last year in football, you had to have so many offensive linemen, so many people at each and every position. that will not be a requirement. The only requirement, it's not even a requirement, suggestion is to have 11 players on the field at all times. But there will be no minimum roster thresholds as well. Another big issue that's going on in our world right now, name, image, and likeness, and certainly we're being very proactive in this space. We cannot, as a conference, come up with particular policies because we transverse 7 states. One state has an active law, New Mexico. Everybody else is developing protocols within their state and on their campuses. We're providing updates on NIL legislation. We continually have webinars. We're considering a weekly newsletter for our compliance, athletic department people, coaches, et cetera. We had a webinar last week of some 70 people, and we'll continue to educate each institution on how they can manage name, image, and likeness and work around the various local and state protocols. The big news that I mentioned before regarding football playoff expansion is a recommendation of a subcommittee that would recommend we go to 12 playoff teams, 6 automatic qualifying champions, and 6 at-large positions. The first 4 games would be on campus. 4 teams, the highest rated 4 conference champions of the 6 would receive byes until the second round and play those games on a bowl site, a neutral site. And culmination sometime hopefully about mid-January, not to get too far into the second semester. With the expanded NFL format, we're a little bit calendar challenged and many moving parts on the potential of a playoff expansion. As it stands right now, the College Football Playoff Board of Directors will potentially vote in late September as to whether approving a plan of a 12-game expansion or not. And implementation could be anywhere from 2 to 4 years from now, the full term of the contract. That will be determined. Really, that's all I have. There's so many other issues out there today, but let me break it down and offer the opportunity to ask questions and answer any specific concerns that you might have regarding Mountain West.
As a reminder, if you'll please raise your hand, and either Maya or Justine will come over to you. Please state your name and your affiliation.
Hi, Craig. Mike Brohart from CSURams.com. I want to go over a couple of the vaccination things. You said the antigen or PCR testing would be at the discretion of the university or their expense. Are you suggesting, or I guess suggesting to universities they pick up the cost, or is it up to them whether they pick up the cost or the student athletes pick up the costs?
The latter. They will make that institutional decision, Mike, but the conference will not be subsidizing testing this year.
Okay. And then as a follow-up, as you said, you're going to count games as forfeits. What other consequences are there if a team cannot play? Like we saw teams that traveled to a site and all of a sudden found out they couldn't play that day. Are teams going to have to pay the travel costs of the team that went out? Is there going to be a transfer of TV money if it's lost for a game that's been lost? How are those things going to work?
That's a good question, very fair. I think the intention from the athletic director group is simply you travel 29 people if that's all you have to play, and you play the game with 29 people. There could be occasions where a team simply cannot travel, will not travel, is not allowed to travel. Then we will address the finances at a later date.
Brent Bergeman with the Colorado Springs Gazette. Can you clarify what you meant when you said Colorado was exempt from this or would require testing still?
The state of Colorado is saying until the vaccine is FDA, EU approved, they will not make it mandatory. But once that is, it will be a mandatory request. There's so many waivers, though, for religious reasons, for personal reasons, almost to the extreme of, I just don't want to take the vaccine. So there's a higher probability that you could waive out of being tested, but that's to be determined.
Craig Kelly-Lyle with Fort Collins, Colorado. And as kind of continuing on that, when you say the state of Colorado testing, that is for students, right? All students, not for athletes or competition. That is the university's requirements for students.
Yep, all students.
Okay.
And Hawaii did have a mandatory. I just found out last night that they have now lifted that, and it is not mandatory in the state of Hawaii. The California state system, the 3 California state system institutions, as it stands this afternoon, it will be mandatory for all students.
Craig, Willie Ramirez with the Associated Press. Could you go back over the percentages? You had said as of, I believe, last week, 7 institutions were at 90%. And when you said 73%, is that the average across, or is that at least every team right now?
That is, I believe, help me out, Jamie, every team, or is that just football, 73%? Football. It's 7 institutions are at 90%. I'm counting 1 institution that's at 88% as being 90%. So 88% plus. 7 of the 12 institutions are 88% vaccinated.
But all 12 are at least 73%.
No.
Oh,
Cumulatively, all 12 are 73%.
Got it.
There are
Thank
others
you.
below 73%.
Thank you.
And this is at least 1 dose or fully vaccinated with 2 shots. So, we're getting close, and I know we met with the coaches last night and this morning as well. They're diligently trying to convince their teams to get vaccinated. It's the best defense against the virus. When I flew out of Colorado yesterday, there was a report in the Denver Post, I believe, that 95% of the hospitalized patients with COVID were unvaccinated. So science is proving a vaccination works regardless of your inclination. There is science behind supporting being vaccinated. And we're trying to create a consequential situation. You have a choice. But if you choose not to be vaccinated, there may be, a consequence.
Craig Kelly-Lyle with Fort Collins, Colorado. And again, there's certainly, you're talking about the urge and all to get players vaccinated, and some school systems are going to require it. What guidance, if any, is the conference providing for fans attending games? Full attendance, partial attendance, socially distanced, vaccination requirements in some sections, not others, or totally? Or is the conference leaving that entirely up to each institution?
Again, Kelly, each institution, because representing 7 states were so different, and even localities within those states. One thing that we found last year, particularly in California, Santa Clara County versus Fresno versus San Diego, they were quite different local protocols and standards.
Any other questions for Commissioner Thompson?
Kirk Kenny from the San Diego Union Tribune. Craig, could you comment a little bit on how the dominoes might fall if, say, Texas and Oklahoma followed through and got to the SEC, and how that might play out?
Boy, you know me, Kirk, that's a hard one. I'm not a hypothetical guy. I don't even know the validity. I think there's already been a statement made by Oklahoma. I'm not 100% on that, but I heard say I don't even want to venture a guess, because I don't know the validity of the report.
In previous times when rumors like this get out, what does that do to you, phone call wise or anything else, where you have to start dealing with these kind of things?
My pocket's been buzzing. I've had several commissioners call, a couple athletic directors, what does this mean, et cetera. And, that's the world we live in today. Anybody can say anything, true, factual, or otherwise, and it's very challenging. I had a good conversation today, a long-range conversation with Chris Vanini of the Athletic, and we went back through the history of the Mountain West, the 22-year history. We had 15 members, and how certain memberships came to be. And I'd frankly forgotten some of them, how quickly those decisions were made. But on this one, I'm not even going to speculate as to whether it's accurate or not. Certainly, no offense to the Houston reporter. He has his sources, but don't know.
And could you talk a little more about the 12-team expansion and being part of those talks and kind of what you guys went through? And
Well, it was a great exercise, and we joked that probably the biggest takeaway and the shock is the fact that we had been meeting for over 2 years and nobody knew about it. But when you have a smaller group, that's the way you can do things. And those of you that know me, that's the way I like to operate. My modus operandi is, shut up until you have something to say. And so I was very pleased with our working group, where it came out. Our conversation with the football coaches this morning was very constructive. They're very excited about the potential. What it'll mean is a 1 or 2 loss Mountain West team has a very strong probability of being in the 12-team playoff, because that would get them one of the 6th highest rated spots as a conference champion. It's going to bring new meaning to our conference championship, i.e. if you have a 7-5 team in one division and an 11-1 team in the other division, you might be prone to cheer for the 11-1 team because they will probably get in the playoff. The 7-5 might knock them out of a spot. That then begets the conversation that if this passes, we'll probably need to, as a league, discuss divisional play. Do we abolish divisional play and just send the 2 highest ranked teams? Hypothetically, they're both 10-2. The winner then could still be in the top 6. The other side of it is there will be 6 at-large teams. Maybe unlikely, but possible that the Mountain West champion, if they're not one of the 6 highest qualified, highest rated conference champions, could get in at large. And to give you an example, this year, it's one small year, one data point. Both Cincinnati and Coastal Carolina would have been in the playoff, and San Jose State was ranked higher than the Pac-12 champion. Now, again, truncated season, small sample size, but they could have potentially gotten in as an at-large, even though they weren't in the top 6. They were the 7th ranked conference champion. So I think it's positive news for the league and momentum. You guys know me. I've been a playoff proponent since the beginning of this league, and have fought hard. 4 teams was a good start to get to a playoff. I personally believe, biasedly, that 12 teams is a great opportunity.
Just building off the in the back, the 12-team potential expansion. What do you think? What is your level of confidence that it will go through and get approved? And in terms of the future of the Mountain West, I know you've touched on it a little bit, but how much does this solidify the conference in a time of potential realignment? And what would it mean financially for the league too?
A lot of questions embedded in there. I think it's got a real chance. We have met one time with the board of directors in Dallas a couple weeks ago, and there was a positive response, and basically said you have 90 days until the end of September to talk to ESPN, talk to all the potential bowl people, talk to groups like this, media, but also internally with the athletic departments, with the coaches. I'm going to meet with the student athletes tomorrow. I would suspect they'll go, commish, 17 games, that's too much. Well, for the fact of the matter, 4 teams will play the exact same amount of games they're playing now. 4 teams will play potentially 1 more game than they're playing now. And 4 teams, possibly 2 of them, could play 17 games, but very remotely, that probability. And so basically 2/3 of the expanded field of 12 teams will play 0 or 1 more game. So I'm anxious to hear what the players have to say tomorrow morning when we visit with them. The incremental revenue, right now 5 leagues receive somewhere in the 13 to 15% of the overall distribution. There have been suggestions that potentially adding 7 playoff games could double the rights fee from $600 million to $1.2 billion. If there's a second network, that could go as high as 3 times, $1.8 billion. But a lot of this will hinge on ESPN and their willingness to extend the contract and pay for those additional games, or if they're more willing to let somebody else get involved as well. Don't know the answer to that question, hasn't been asked yet.
Hi, I was just wondering, is there going to be any policies or guidelines in place that will allow the return of media's being able to do one-on-one in-person interviews? I mean, will the media have to be tested? I think you tried to do it for this event, but will that be a requirement for the media?
We have not discussed that. Javen, am I missing something? Maybe the SIDs have. The athletic directors, Steve, at this point have not.
We are having a meeting with the sports information directors over the next couple of weeks and sharing policies of what we're looking at in each locale, and then we'll be sharing that with the media here in the month of August.
Thank you.
Brent Bergman again from the Colorado Springs Gazette. If the league were to abolish the division format, what were some of the options being discussed? What would a schedule look like? Kind of what possibilities could we be looking at if it wasn't a division format?
Okay, full candor, we spent about 2 minutes on that this morning. Nothing concrete, nothing definitive. Something along the lines potentially of saying, maybe let's kind of have quasi-divisions, meaning you play the 5 institutions that you normally play in your division. We just don't recognize that as, so that we keep some natural geographic rivalries. We don't get back into days past. That's one example. That would probably be a good starting point.
Okay, because some of the coaches did mention this, but kind of wanted to defer to you. But they did mention preserving some rivalries. Mm-hmm. Would that be something the conference would take into account? Colorado State, Wyoming, Nevada, UNLV, would those be protected?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be the intention. Certainly, that particular series is the longest running in the conference, one of the longest running in the nation. Has been played since the 1890s. So we're going to want to protect that one.
Last opportunity. Any other questions for Commissioner Thompson?
Hi, Stephen Hicks from KFSN TV. Can you walk us through how the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl came about and who approached whom and why that might be a good partnership for the conference?
I'm not going to avoid the question. I'll answer best I know, and I just found the answer to that from Steve Lopes a couple hours ago. Arguably, it's a promotional opportunity for Jimmy Kimmel, and they had approached, I think, Steve, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, that the intention is the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl presented by somebody, a corporate sponsor. But, we weren't involved in those conversations. I think it was a fun advance, a fun portrayal in the way they announced the game. My understanding is, Steve, that Jimmy plans to be at the game and meet with the teams even perhaps a day or two before the game. And, in today's day and age and world, it's a fun promotional opportunity for for ABC as well as for Jimmy Kimmel.